Hello, in this video we are going to look at different branching strategies. So the previous video introduced branching as a general tool that you should be familiar with, but there are different strategies for when to create branches and how to work with them and when to delete them again and so on. And I will go through three, I think, different types. Some I've seen, some I've sort of seen recommended in other videos. So that's either when you use Scrum or Kanban as your project management tool. So the point is that these branching strategies has a semester project focus and may not be all that applicable to a professional level, because that's often more complex. So if you are working professionally, you may need more branches. For often I see there's a development branch and a quality assurance branch, and then the production branch. Maybe that's your trunk or your master. Maybe there's a deployment branch, or maybe there are branches for different versions. For example, if you have to maintain your project in different versions, version 4, 5 and 6, because some customers are still on version 4 and they haven't upgraded to version 5 and so on. So you may have the software that you need to manage in different versions. So there may be all kinds of branches for all kinds of reasons, and we're not really going to look at these kinds because that's way too elaborate. We will look at what you may do for SAP. So here's the first version, and I realized the irony in calling the other ones too elaborate, because here's my diagram, which is somewhat incomprehensible, but I really could manage to make animations of this mess. The point is that you're all working on the same branch, trunk-based I think it's called, but you have a single branch, and that's in the remote repository, and then each of you are 4 in this project, you each have a local repository, each of you, 1 each. And whenever you have something finished, you can right, so the pink one pulls from the master to update their local repository whenever they have something finished, or some piece of code that other people need. Maybe you're working multiple people on one single feature, then you push that and someone else can pull that to update their own local version of it. And whenever you have a feature finished, you may push that to the remote repository, and others will have to pull that before they can push their stuff. And so it's a lot of pushing and pulling to the same one. There is some simplicity because you basically don't have to manage branches, you're just working in the same thing, but it also means that you will most likely encounter a lot of merge conflicts where multiple people have worked on sort of the same code, so Git does not know how to put those two pieces of code together, and that causes a merge conflict. And those are just annoying, and if you don't know how to handle them correctly, you end up throwing away code and someone will have to redo that, or if they don't know how to revisit the history and so on. So this can quickly become a huge mess if you're too many people working on the same code base using this approach. So this is usually the beginner approach, because branching can be a bit difficult, and then they realize that branching is a good idea. Alright, a single branch, all working on the same thing. Then I have seen something called personal branches. Well, that's what I name it. There is a master branch, and then each group member per color here, they have their own personal branch, and they have their own local personal repository. And so initially they all just check out the master or trunk, they create their own branch and push that. So we now have 5, assuming 4 group members, 5 different branches remotely. Each branch belongs to a group member, and so you have your own branch you can work in, and that means fewer merge conflicts. And whenever you have something you need to share with others, maybe that's a completed feature, you push that to the trunk, and others group members will have to merge the trunk or the master or the main, whatever, merge that into their own local, into their own repository, and you can push those changes. So now the remote repository is updated basically with this piece of code along with your own, and it works sort of better. I mean, you just, whenever you start a new feature, you start that in your personal branch. Whenever it's done, you push it to the trunk, and then you work on a new feature, and that's done at some point, and you push it to the trunk. But it's difficult to work multiple people on the same feature, because either you have to share your code through the trunk, meaning a lot of pushing and pulling to the trunk, which may conflict with the other group members, or you have to sort of work two people on the same personal branch, and then the personality, you know, the personal part of that branch sort of gets diluted because it's no longer personal, and which branch are you working on, and so on. So I don't recommend this approach either, but it's slightly better than the previous one. Right, so each have the personal branch. If you don't sort of finish something but you push it to the remote, then it doesn't interfere with others, so that's a benefit. And then whenever you have something fully done, you merge that into the trunk. So yeah. Alright, the next step up in making things better is if you use Kanban. I guess it can work for other project management approaches, but it just sort of aligns well with the idea of Kanban. So the point is, you have your trunk, and then you make a new branch for each feature or task or bug fix or refactoring or whatever you need to do. You make a branch, and once it's done, you merge that back into the trunk, so the trunk is updated with the latest working stuff, and then you delete that branch. And this is the approach. If you use Kanban in your semester project from third semester onwards, then I suggest this approach, but I guess it can be used for other approaches as well, even if you don't use Kanban. And the suggestion is to name the branches. So if you're working on a new user story or feature, you call it feature or user story with the ID of that user story, and then a quick name to say what is this about. If it's a bug fix, maybe that bug fix has an ID in your product backlog or in your Kanban board or whatever. So some kind of type of what are you doing, some ID so you can find it in your task list, and some name that describes what is this trunk about, or sorry, this branch. And you have your initial main branch, the trunk, and Pink person wants to start a new feature, so they create a new branch for this. I have left out the local branches because that just became too much back and forth, updating local to remote and then remote into trunk and so on. So yeah, and they at the same time someone else starts a new feature, or maybe that's a bug fix or whatever, and we might imagine there is more history to the left of this, so this is just at some point in time in the middle of the project. And pink person works and makes commits and pushes to this branch, and yellow person works and makes, you know, pushes from the remote, from that local workspace to the remote repository here. And at some point pink person is finished with whatever task they're working on, and they merge that into the trunk, so the trunk is updated with the latest working code. And then yellow person needs to update their own before they can merge into trunks, so they make that pull push thing that we have seen before. I guess if there were history to the left here, then pink person might have to make a pull request also. IntelliJ and Rider will tell you when you're trying to push something, but you have to merge first if the latest version in the master is later than the one you started working on. Right. But in this case there were no in between, so the push was accepted without having to pull first. But in this case we want to push something, but there is a later version than what we started on for the yellow person, so they have to pull and fix things if there's anything broken, and then push up here. And then someone else, well, that sort of happens before this, and they start on a different feature again, and someone starts on a feature here, and the blue person finishes and pushes up here, merges into the master branch trunk, and so on, and so branching out and merging back in, and cleaning up after yourself, so you may delete these branches if you don't need them anymore, or maybe you can archive them, I don't know, at least so they don't clutter up the GitHub UI if you feel like it. Right, so you have one main branch where everything should be working all the time. Whenever you start something new, you create a new branch for that, and you merge it back in when it's done. That's the idea. And you have your local branches, of course, local repositories, and your local workspace, of course, but I have left it out. Okay, so this is the best version of the simpler ones. You can work multiple people on the same task. Right? You can multiple group members can just check out this task and push and pull to that one, and fix whatever problems they have locally before putting back into the trunk. So this one is a pretty good way to start off. The last suggestion is more Scrum like. You still have your master where everything is working, and you only update it after each sprint. So in Scrum you have these sprints, and for each sprint you do basically Kanban, where you create a new branch, a sub-branch of sprint 1 for the feature, and the feature is done, so you merge that back in, and someone else wants to start on feature 2, so they work here and they want to merge it back in, but have to update this branch first, so they can merge it into the sprint 1, and we have feature 3, so they are working and they have to do the pull, push, and someone is starting on feature 4 and putting that back in, and at the end of the sprint you take whatever you have here that is working. If you have a feature that you didn't finish, you will have to merge that into sprint 2, assuming that you continue working on it. So this one, this checkpoint here, this commit, it contains only working code and working features and working finished stuff, and you push that, or you merge back into trunk or master or main, whatever you call them. I call them trunk in these slides, apparently. Not particularly consistent compared to master in the previous videos, but I hope you can manage. And then for sprint 2 you do the same thing. You create a new branch called sprint 2, and for each user story and task and feature, whatever you need, you create a sub branch. I mean, if you're working on a user story, sometimes that user story requires subtasks, and maybe you don't need to create sub branches for that. You just create a branch for the user story, but that's up to you. If it's somehow a large, complicated piece of work to finish a user story, maybe you want to create even sub branches for that user story. I don't think it's going to be necessary. So you repeat this process. You have something that's each of these dots is working finished and could potentially be pushed back into the trunk, but we'd only want to deliver after each sprint is finished to the customer, so that's when we merge back, and then this can be delivered to the customer with everything from the sprint, and then repeat for sprint 2 and 3 and so on. So these are the strategies, and you will have to sort of play around with them and see what works for you. Yeah, I think that's what I have to suggest. Obviously you can look up all kinds of sprint branching strategies on the internet. There are plenty of suggestions. Git flow is popular, and there's something called Git branch flow or something. There are a few things, but I have simplified those because I think they contain more branches than what you need in your project. So Thank you for watching.